A strange welcome. Murray Grant adjusted the silver necklace her late husband had given her as she glanced at her reflection in the mirror. At 63, she was still elegant, carrying herself with a quiet dignity that had seen her through life's storms. Her smooth, dark skin glowed with a warmth that came from years of laughter and love, though her eyes held a hint of worry today. Today was supposed to be special, a visit to her only son, David, and his family. Yet, for some reason, she couldn't shake the unease she felt. The last few visits had left her feeling strange, nauseous, weak, even dizzy at times. She chalked it up to the stress of adjusting to her son's marriage and the challenges of seeing him build a life that, to her, often felt distant and foreign. As she drove to David's house in the suburbs, Marie's thoughts drifted to her son's wife, Sandra. Sandra was always polite, but Marie could never shake the feeling that there was something lurking behind her daughter-in-law's polished smiles and crisp, perfect home. Every visit, Sandra would serve elaborate meals, carefully crafted and spiced to what she thought would suit Marie's taste. And yet, something about Sandra's cooking always made her feel unsettled. Marie parked her car in front of David's immaculate, two-story house. The lawn was trimmed to perfection, the flower beds bursting with brightly colored flowers, and the sight of her two grandchildren, Elijah and Chloe, eagerly waving at her from the window melted her heart. "Grandma," they cried, rushing out as soon as she stepped out of the car. The children threw their small arms around her, their excitement contagious. "My babies," Marie laughed, kneeling to embrace them properly. The joy in their faces erased some of her tension, if only for a moment. She loved her grandchildren fiercely and tried to focus on them as she walked towards the front door, where David waited with a warm smile. "Mom, you're early," he exclaimed, pulling her into a tight hug. "Early? No, baby, I'm always right on time," she teased, patting his cheek. David had inherited her late husband's height and build, standing tall with an easy confidence that always made her proud. As they stepped inside, Marie took in the familiar yet strangely cold atmosphere of her son's home. Everything was spotless, from the gleaming hardwood floors to the neatly arranged family photos on the walls. And there, standing with a practiced smile and holding a tray of drinks, was Sandra. "Marie, it's so good to see you," Sandra said, her tone warm but her eyes unreadable. She handed Marie a glass of iced tea, her manicured nails glinting under the soft lighting. "Thank you, dear," Marie replied politely, though she felt an odd reluctance as she took a sip. Dinner was soon served, and as always, Sandra had gone above and beyond. The table was laden with a feast: jambalaya, roasted vegetables, freshly baked bread, and Sandra's special peach cobbler. Sandra loved to present herself as the perfect hostess, and tonight was no exception. "I made the jambalaya extra spicy for you, Marie," Sandra said with a smile, watching closely as Marie took her first bite. Marie hesitated. The smell was intense, rich with a medley of spices, but something felt off. She took a tentative bite, smiling to herself as the familiar taste brought memories of her own mother's cooking. But as she swallowed, a strange sensation crept over her, a burning that went beyond the spices, settling uncomfortably in her stomach. "It's very flavorful, Sandra," Mary said, choosing her words carefully. "Thank you. I know it's not as authentic as you might make, but I tried my best," Sandra replied, with a hint of sarcasm that only Marie seemed to notice. As the meal went on, Marie's discomfort grew. Her stomach felt heavy, a slow nausea building as each bite added to the strange unease. David was talking about his promotion at the law firm, and the kids were animatedly recounting their school projects. But Marie found it hard to focus. The room felt stifling, and her head began to ache. "Mom, are you okay?" David asked, noticing her pale complexion. Marie forced a smile. "Just a bit tired, honey. Maybe I overdid it today." Sandra's voice cut in, dripping with feigned concern. "Oh no, Marie, I hope it's not my cooking. I always worry about getting the spices just right for you." Her words sounded genuine enough, but the look in her eyes was almost satisfied. Marie's stomach twisted as she tried to brush off the nagging feeling that something was wrong. "Don't worry about me," Marie said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's probably just the heat outside." As dessert was served, Marie knew she had to get home soon. The peach cobbler looked delicious, but she couldn't bear the thought of eating another bite. She excused herself early, brushing off David's concerns with a weak smile and a promise to rest. On the drive home, Marie's thoughts spiraled. This wasn't the first time she felt unwell after one of Sandra's meals. At first, she had dismissed it as a coincidence, or perhaps a sign that she was getting older and couldn't handle rich food the way she used to. But this time felt different. Her symptoms were stronger, more unsettling. And then there was the way Sandra had watched her, almost expectantly. Marie shook her head, trying to push the troubling thoughts aside. Sandra was her son's wife, the mother of her grandchildren. There had to be a rational explanation. But as she lay in bed that night, clutching her stomach as the nausea rose once more, Marie couldn't shake the creeping suspicion that something wasn't right. She thought back to Sandra's smile, to the way she had insisted on preparing Marie's food extra special. A cold shiver ran down her spine. The next morning, Marie's phone chimed with a message from Sandra. "Hope you're feeling better, Marie. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I found some wonderful remedies for digestion issues. I'd be happy to bring them over." Marie stared at the message, her stomach twisting with unease. Sandra's concern felt artificial, forced, as though she were playing a part. But why? Marie decided she couldn't ignore her suspicions anymore. She needed to get to the bottom of this. As much as it hurt her to think badly of her daughter-in-law, she couldn't let her guard down if something was truly amiss. And so, with a heavy heart, Marie resolved to keep a careful eye on Sandra. She would not jump to conclusions, but she would be vigilant. Family was everything to her, but if there was even a chance that her health, or her relationship with her son, was being sabotaged, she needed to know. Seeds of suspicion. The days following that dinner were filled with a slow, creeping unease for Marie. The symptoms she'd experienced, nausea, dizziness, and fatigue, had lingered longer than usual, and her body still felt off. Each time she thought of Sandra's smiling face as she served her food, Marie's stomach twisted anew. The feeling was so disturbing that she found herself pushing away the memory, unsure if she was overreacting or if her instincts were trying to tell her something crucial. Determined not to let her imagination run wild, Marie decided to take a rational approach. She pulled out a small notebook from her drawer, one that she used to jot down reminders and grocery lists, and wrote at the top of a fresh page, "Symptom log." In careful handwriting, she documented her experience from that evening, what she ate, how she felt, the timeline of symptoms, and the lingering sensations that hadn't quite disappeared. She wasn't sure if this would lead to anything, but she wanted to keep a record, if only to assure herself that she wasn't imagining things. As she was writing, her phone buzzed with another message from Sandra. "Just checking in, Marie. How are you feeling? I came across a recipe for a special tea that might help with stomach issues. Should I bring you some next time we meet?" Marie's heart quickened. The tone of Sandra's message seemed overly sweet, almost patronizing. The constant, almost insistent offers of help were beginning to feel less like concern and more like something darker. Though Marie struggled to put a name to it. Was Sandra trying to appear compassionate, or was there something else behind her eagerness? Deciding it was best to respond politely, Marie typed back a brief message. "Thank you, Sandra. I'm feeling better. No need for the tea, but I appreciate it." She hoped that would be enough to keep her daughter-in-law at a respectful distance, at least for now. But Sandra's persistence only intensified. Over the next few days, she sent Marie links to articles about digestive health, suggestions for dietary adjustments, and even a few natural remedy recipes. The frequency of her messages became unsettling, and each one seemed to carry an underlying assumption that Marie was somehow fragile, incapable of taking care of her own health. By the following Sunday, Marie felt her anxiety mounting. She had received another invitation for dinner at David and Sandra's house, and as much as she wanted to spend time with her son and grandchildren, she dreaded the thought of sitting down to another meal prepared by Sandra. But she couldn't refuse without raising suspicions, and she didn't want to risk alienating her son. The drive to David's house that afternoon felt heavier than usual. Marie gripped the steering wheel, her mind racing with scenarios. What if she was wrong? What if Sandra truly was just a caring, attentive daughter-in-law, and Marie's suspicions were simply a byproduct of her own insecurities? But the unease in her stomach told a different story, one that was harder to ignore with each passing moment. When she arrived, David greeted her with his usual warmth, pulling her into a hug that momentarily washed away her worries. The children ran up to her, clinging to her legs and begging her to play with them, and for a brief moment, Marie felt a sense of normalcy return. "Mom, it's so good to see you," David said, his face lighting up with a smile. "Sandra has been working on something special for dinner. I think you'll love it." Marie's heart skipped a beat. She forced a smile, nodding as she followed him into the house, the familiar sense of spices and roasted vegetables wafting from the kitchen. Sandra was bustling around, arranging plates with the same meticulous care she always exhibited, her blonde hair tied back neatly, her expression calm and collected. "Marie," Sandra called out, her voice bright. "I made your favorite, spicy shrimp etouffee. I know how much you love Cajun flavors, so I really wanted to make something that would remind you of home." Marie's stomach churned, but she managed a polite smile. "That sounds wonderful, Sandra. Thank you for going through all that trouble." "Oh, it's no trouble at all," Sandra replied, giving her an almost too sweet smile. "Anything for family." As they sat down at the dining table, Marie noticed that Sandra had placed an unusually large portion on her plate. The etouffee looked delicious, but there was something off about the way Sandra watched her, as if anticipating her reaction. David and the children began eating, chatting animatedly about their day, but Marie felt a strange, almost oppressive silence settle around her as she picked up her fork. She took a small bite, trying to ignore the piercing gaze of her daughter-in-law. The flavors were rich and intense, a bit more seasoned than she was used to, but the food was undeniably well prepared. Yet, as she continued eating, a familiar queasiness began to build in her stomach. "Mom, you okay?" David's voice broke through her thoughts, his eyes filled with concern. Marie realized she had been sitting there, frozen, her fork midway to her mouth. Yes, I'm fine," she replied, forcing a smile, just savoring the flavors. Sandra's smile tightened. "I'm glad you like it, Marie. I spent extra time on the seasoning just for you." Marie nodded, but the taste of the food seemed to grow harsher with each bite. She could feel her stomach rebelling, a wave of nausea building rapidly. Her hands began to tremble, and she set down her fork, hoping no one would notice. But Sandra noticed. Her eyes gleamed with a strange satisfaction, though her voice remained as sugary sweet as ever. "Marie, are you sure you're all right? You look a bit pale." Marie tried to respond, but her throat felt dry, her words caught somewhere between her mind and her mouth. The room seemed to spin slightly, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest, each beat echoing with a growing sense of dread. "Maybe you should lie down, Mom," David suggested, his voice tinged with worry. "You haven't been looking well lately." Before she could protest, Sandra stood up, her hands clasped in apparent concern. "I'll help you to the guest room, Marie. You really should rest." Marie wanted to resist, to insist that she was fine, but her body felt weak, almost detached. She allowed Sandra to guide her down the hallway, though every step felt like an eternity. Once they reached the guest room, Sandra helped her sit on the bed, smoothing the blanket with a strange, almost robotic precision. "Just relax, Marie," Sandra said, her voice low and eerily calm. "You'll feel better soon." Marie lay back against the pillows, her mind clouded with exhaustion and a sense of helplessness that she hadn't felt in years. She tried to stay alert, to focus on Sandra's face, but her vision blurred as a wave of fatigue overtook her. "Let me get you some tea," Sandra whispered, her tone dripping with feigned compassion. Before Marie could respond, Sandra slipped out of the room, leaving her alone in the dimly lit space. As she lay there, Marie's mind raced. Her suspicions, which she had tried so hard to suppress, fled to life with newfound clarity. The lingering nausea, the dizziness, the exhaustion, none of it felt like a simple coincidence anymore. She thought back to the extra time Sandra had spent on the seasoning, to the strange look in her eyes as she had served Marie her plate. Marie's heart pounded as she realized the gravity of her situation. She had no proof, nothing concrete, but her instincts told her that something was deeply wrong. The woman her son had married, the mother of her grandchildren, was hiding something dark and dangerous. But how could she confront Sandra without evidence? How could she accuse her daughter-in-law of something so sinister without risking her relationship with David, without destroying the fragile balance of their family? As she drifted into a restless sleep, Marie resolved to take matters into her own hands. She would watch Sandra closely, documenting every detail, every symptom, every strange interaction. She would uncover the truth, no matter how painful or terrifying it might be. The truth in plain sight. Marie woke the next morning feeling drained and disoriented, remnants of nausea lingering in her stomach like the aftertaste of a bad dream. She lay in bed, replaying the events of the previous evening in her mind. The strange looks, the uncomfortably intense flavors, and Sandra's too sweet concern, all of it replayed like a dark melody, one she couldn't escape. The morning light streaming through her curtains didn't bring the comfort she'd hoped. Instead, it served as a stark reminder that this wasn't a nightmare, it was her life. And if her suspicions were even halfway correct, something dangerous was lurking within her own family. Marie sat up slowly, a fresh determination settling over her. She picked up the notebook she had started and wrote down every detail she could remember from the night before: the dishes Sandra had served, the spices she had mentioned, the symptoms that had started shortly after her first bite. She would need more than her instincts to confront Sandra. She needed solid evidence. A sudden knock on her front door broke her concentration. She tucked the notebook away and went to answer, surprised to find David standing there with an anxious look on his face. "David, honey, what brings you here so early?" she asked, masking her surprise with a smile. "I was worried about you, Mom," he said, stepping inside. "You didn't look well last night. I just wanted to check in and see if you're all right." Marie's heart warmed at his concern. She knew that David loved her deeply, and his presence brought her a momentary sense of relief. But there was something else behind his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. "I'm fine, baby," she said, guiding him to the kitchen where she started making coffee. "Just a little under the weather, I guess. Nothing a good day of rest can't fix." He studied her for a moment, his brow furrowed. "Are you sure? You've been getting sick a lot lately, and, well, Sandra thinks it might be something serious. She was really worried last night." Marie's grip tightened around the coffee pot as she poured the steaming liquid into a mug. "I appreciate her concern, David, but I know my body. It's probably just my age catching up with me." David hesitated, clearly conflicted. "Mom, Sandra's been looking up a lot of information on digestive issues and food intolerances. She thinks maybe you should see a specialist." Marie forced herself to smile, though she could feel her anger simmering beneath the surface. "I'm sure Sandra means well, but I don't think a specialist is necessary. Just a bit of rest and some plain food, and I'll be back to normal." David nodded, though he looked unconvinced. After a brief chat, he hugged her tightly, promising to visit again soon. As he left, Marie's heart sank. The idea of Sandra subtly planting seeds of doubt in David's mind, suggesting that his mother was somehow weak or ill, filled her with a quiet rage. Once she was alone, Marie resolved to dig deeper into Sandra's behavior. She needed more than her own observations. She needed physical proof. She decided to take an unconventional step. The next time she went to David and Sandra's for dinner, she would discreetly take a sample of the food with her, just enough to test for anything unusual. That Sunday, Marie found herself once again at David and Sandra's doorstep, her nerves on edge. She clutched a small plastic container in her purse, hidden beneath a few tissues, just large enough to hold a discreet portion of food. She hoped she wouldn't have to use it, but the sense of foreboding that settled over her suggested otherwise. Sandra greeted her at the door with the usual overly enthusiastic smile, dressed impeccably in a bright sundress that seemed at odds with the gloomy feeling in Marie's heart. "Marie, it's so wonderful to see you. I made something special tonight, my signature lamb stew," Sandra announced, leading her into the dining room. The dining table was set in Sandra's usual flawless style, each place setting arranged with precision. The stew sat steaming in a large pot, the rich aroma filling the room. But to Marie, the smell felt overpowering, almost cloying. She forced herself to sit down and join in the family's cheerful conversation, though her mind was entirely focused on the task at hand. As they began to eat, Marie waited for the right moment. She took small bites, doing her best to mask her discomfort. The stew tasted fine, yet she couldn't shake the unease creeping into her stomach. She noticed Sandra's gaze lingering on her, watching her reactions with a strange intensity. Finally, when the others were distracted by a story David was telling, Marie seized her chance. She carefully scooped a small amount of stew into her napkin, pretending to dab at her mouth, then slipped it into the container in her purse. Her heart pounded as she secured it, relieved that no one seemed to notice. By the time dessert was served, a decadent chocolate tart, Marie was already feeling the familiar wave of nausea building. She declined the dessert politely, making an excuse about being full. Sandra gave her a sympathetic smile, though her eyes held a flicker of something else, something that sent a chill down Marie's spine. That night, back at home, Marie placed the sample in her refrigerator, unsure of how to proceed. She knew she couldn't test it herself, but there had to be a way to find out what was making her sick. After some research, she found a nearby lab that offered private testing services. Though it felt strange and even paranoid, she decided to submit the sample anonymously, asking them to test for any unusual substances or high levels of certain ingredients. The following days were a blur of anxious waiting. Marie went about her routines, trying to distract herself with chores and errands, but her thoughts kept returning to the sample and the lab. Every ring of the phone made her heart skip a beat, and each day that passed without results only heightened her apprehension. Finally, the call came. A lab technician explained that they had tested the sample for common allergens, irritants, and other unusual compounds. Marie gripped the phone tightly, her heart pounding in her chest as she waited for the verdict. The technician hesitated before speaking. "Ms. Grant, the sample you submitted contained unusually high levels of capsaicin and piperine. Those compounds are found in certain spices, like black pepper and chili peppers, but in concentrations this high, they could easily cause severe gastrointestinal discomfort, dizziness, and nausea." Marie's blood ran cold. She thanked the technician, hanging up the phone in a daze. High levels of capsaicin and piperine, two substances that could cause exactly the symptoms she had been experiencing. She thought back to Sandra's extra spicy dishes, her insistence on preparing Marie's meals with special seasonings, and the satisfied look in her eyes as she watched Marie eat. The implications were devastating. Sandra wasn't just careless with her cooking. She was intentionally preparing food that would make Marie sick. But why? What could drive her to do something so cruel? As the truth settled over her, Marie felt a mix of anger and sorrow. She had welcomed Sandra into her family with open arms, defended her against whispers from friends and neighbors who questioned her motives. And now, to discover this betrayal, it was almost too much to bear. But despite her hurt, Marie knew she had to act carefully. Confronting Sandra outright could backfire. She didn't have definitive proof of Sandra's intentions, only the lab results indicating high levels of certain spices. She couldn't risk a confrontation without concrete evidence that would hold up if questioned. Marie's resolve hardened. She would continue her investigation, carefully documenting everything, gathering samples if needed. She would protect herself, but she would also protect her family. David and the children deserved to know the truth, and Marie would not allow Sandra's deceit to tear them apart. That night, as Marie lay in bed, a fierce determination took hold of her. She would not let Sandra win. She would be vigilant, patient, and cautious, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally come to light. And when that moment came, Sandra would have no place left to hide. Confronting shadows. Marie woke up the next day feeling a strange sense of purpose. Her anger over Sandra's betrayal hadn't subsided, but it had transformed into a steely resolve. This was no longer about her discomfort or her pride. It was about protecting her family. She had endured her suspicions and Sandra's manipulations in silence for too long, but no more. Today, she would take action. Marie decided to visit her closest friend, Ethel, someone she trusted like a sister. Ethel had been there for her through thick and thin, always providing a level-headed perspective whenever Marie struggled to see clearly. She knew that Ethel's wisdom and support would help her devise a plan. Later that morning, Marie pulled up to Ethel's modest home, a warm, welcoming place filled with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of old jazz records playing softly in the background. Ethel opened the door with her usual big smile and enveloped Marie in a tight hug. "Marie, it's been too long. Come on in, honey. I was just about to make us some breakfast," Ethel said, guiding her friend to the kitchen. Once they were settled at the kitchen table, Marie hesitated, unsure of where to start. She took a deep breath, then told Ethel everything, about the strange illnesses after Sandra's meals, the way Sandra watched her eat, the lab results, and her growing fears. Ethel listened without interrupting, her face a mask of concern as Marie laid out the details of her suspicions. When Marie finished, Ethel sat back, her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Honey, I've known you for over 40 years, and I know you wouldn't bring something like this up lightly. But this is serious. Are you sure you want to handle it alone?" Marie nodded. "I don't have much choice, Ethel. David would never believe me without solid proof, and if I confront Sandra now, she'll just deny everything. I need something undeniable, something I can show him." Ethel sighed, her face softening with empathy. "I understand, Marie, but you don't have to do this all by yourself. I'll help you however I can. We need a plan, one that won't backfire." They spent the next hour brainstorming ways to gather more concrete evidence. Ethel suggested recording conversations, keeping a detailed journal of each visit, and possibly consulting a private investigator. The idea of hiring a professional felt extreme, but Marie was willing to consider anything if it meant exposing Sandra's true intentions. "Thank you, Ethel," Marie said, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Ethel reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on hers. "You're not alone in this, Marie. We'll get to the bottom of it together." Over the next few weeks, Marie put their plan into action. She continued attending family dinners with Sandra, playing her part as the doting mother and grandmother while watching and documenting every detail. She noted each dish Sandra served her, the specific symptoms she felt afterward, and the frequency of Sandra's unsolicited health advice. Marie also bought a small voice recorder, discreetly tucking it into her purse during her visits. She knew it wasn't exactly legal to record someone without their knowledge, but desperation had pushed her beyond her usual boundaries. She needed to capture Sandra's manipulative behavior, her carefully veiled comments, and perhaps, if luck was on her side, even a slip-up that would reveal her true intentions. Each visit felt like a high-stakes game. Marie's heart raced every time she sat down at the dining table, her senses heightened as she tried to maintain her composure. She watched Sandra carefully, noting every glance, every insincere smile, and every forced expression of concern. It was exhausting, both mentally and physically, but Marie reminded herself that she was doing this for her family. During one visit, Sandra served a shrimp and sausage gumbo, a dish that had always been a family favorite. Marie felt her stomach tighten as Sandra placed a generous portion in front of her, the steam rising from the bowl in aromatic tendrils. The gumbo looked delicious, but Marie couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Oh, Marie, I made sure to add extra spices, just how you like it," Sandra said, her voice laced with an almost mocking sweetness. "I know you have such a refined palate for spicy food." Marie forced a smile, nodding in thanks. She took a few small bites, pretending to enjoy the meal while her mind raced with plans. Her purse, with the recorder safely hidden inside, sat by her feet. If Sandra said anything suspicious, she would catch it. The dinner progressed as usual, with David and the children chatting happily, oblivious to the tension simmering between the two women. Sandra seemed to revel in her role as hostess, playing the part of the caring wife and mother with exaggerated charm. But every now and then, she would glance at Marie, her eyes glinting with a strange intensity that sent chills down Marie's spine. Toward the end of the meal, Sandra leaned forward, her tone soft and filled with feigned concern. "Marie, you've been looking a bit tired lately. Have you considered trying a new diet? I read about this amazing cleanse that might be just what you need." Marie felt a flash of anger, but kept her face neutral. "Thank you, Sandra. I'll think about it." Sandra's smile widened, a hint of satisfaction flickering in her eyes. "I could even make the meals for you, if you'd like. I know how much you enjoy my cooking." Marie suppressed a shudder. She felt trapped, forced to play along with Sandra's charade, while the nausea crept into her stomach. She could only hope that her efforts to record these interactions would eventually reveal the truth. A breakthrough came unexpectedly a few weeks later. Marie had been invited to another Sunday dinner, and she had braced herself for another evening of surveillance and carefully measured bites. But when she arrived, Sandra greeted her with an unexpected announcement. "Marie, I hope you don't mind, but I invited a few of my friends to join us tonight," Sandra said with a bright smile. "I thought it would be nice to have a larger gathering." Marie's stomach twisted. She hadn't anticipated this development, and the thought of navigating a social event in Sandra's carefully curated circle filled her with dread. But she forced herself to smile and play along, determined not to let Sandra see any sign of weakness. As Sandra's friends arrived, the atmosphere shifted. The dinner took on a different tone, with Sandra's friends showering her with compliments on her cooking, her home, and her hospitality. Marie could see how much Sandra enjoyed the attention, basking in her admiration as though it validated her role as David's wife. Throughout the evening, Marie felt increasingly isolated. She barely knew these women, and their polite small talk only added to her sense of discomfort. But as the night wore on, she caught snippets of their conversation that hinted at something darker beneath the surface. At one point, Marie overheard Sandra talking quietly with one of her friends in the kitchen. She pretended to examine a photo on the wall nearby, straining to hear their conversation without drawing attention. "I've had to be creative with her," Sandra was saying in a low, conspiratorial tone. "You know how it is, dealing with certain people. They just don't know when to step back and let go." Marie's heart pounded. The words sent a chill down her spine. Was Sandra referring to her? The implication was clear, yet subtle enough that Marie couldn't confront her without looking paranoid. Sandra's friend laughed softly. "Well, you're handling it beautifully. I'd be pulling my hair out if I were in your shoes." Sandra chuckled, her voice dripping with false humility. "Oh, it's just a matter of patience and persistence. I've always believed that you have to take control if you want things done right." Marie clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior. Sandra's words confirmed her suspicions. This was no mere coincidence. Sandra saw her as an obstacle, someone to be manipulated or eliminated quietly. But the brazenness of Sandra's behavior also gave Marie hope. It was a sign that Sandra was growing complacent, careless even. As the night wore on, Marie made sure to capture every interaction on her recorder. She endured the evening with a polite smile, biding her time as Sandra continued to play her part. When she finally left, Marie's mind was racing with possibilities. She had gathered enough incriminating evidence to feel confident about confronting Sandra, but she knew that a direct confrontation would require tact. She needed to choose the right moment, the right approach. If she moved too quickly, Sandra could deny everything, playing the innocent victim and casting doubt on Marie's credibility. Marie returned home, exhausted, filled with a fierce determination. She knew she was close to exposing the truth, close to freeing her family from Sandra's manipulative grasp. The next step was to find a way to confront Sandra without giving her a chance to escape. Marie would plan carefully, considering every angle, every potential outcome. And when the time came, she would be ready. The truth uncovered. Marie's heart pounded as she prepared for what she knew would be the most difficult evening of her life. It had been weeks since she'd made the decision to confront Sandra, and in that time, she had carefully constructed her plan. Every detail was meticulously thought out. There would be no more fear, no more pretending, and no more playing the role of the passive mother-in-law. Tonight, she would reveal everything. She glanced at the small notebook in her hand, filled with her notes on each meal, each strange symptom, and every suspicious comment Sandra had made. Alongside it were the recordings, safely stored on a USB drive, capturing Sandra's veiled insults, manipulative conversations, and, most chillingly, her hints of resentment toward Marie. But what gave Marie the greatest sense of confidence was her visit to Dr. Thompson earlier that week. After explaining everything, her symptoms, her suspicions, and even the lab results showing high levels of irritants, Dr. Thompson had agreed to help. They had run further tests, specifically looking for traces of certain substances in Marie's blood that could indicate prolonged exposure to harmful irritants. When the results came back, they showed exactly what Marie feared: a consistent pattern of exposure to unusually high levels of capsaicin and piperine, among other irritants, confirming that her suspicions weren't mere paranoia. Marie felt the weight of the truth settle over her as she drove to David and Sandra's house that evening. She knew what was at stake. David's heart would break when he learned the truth, but she could not protect him from this any longer. He deserved to know the kind of person he had married. As she parked in front of their house, Marie took a deep breath, centering herself. She thought of her late husband, imagining his voice offering her strength. With newfound resolve, she walked up the steps and rang the doorbell. Sandra answered, her smile as bright and insincere as ever. "Mary, so lovely to see you. I've prepared a special meal tonight, something I think you'll really enjoy." Marie returned the smile, her heart steady. "Thank you, Sandra. I'm looking forward to it." David appeared behind Sandra, greeting his mother with a warm hug. "Mom, it's so great to have you here. We missed you last week." Marie patted his shoulder, offering him a reassuring smile. "I missed you too, baby." They made their way to the dining room, where the table was set as meticulously as always. Sandra had gone all out, preparing an elaborate spread of dishes, each one carefully presented and heavily seasoned. Marie recognized the telltale signs of her extra special recipes, spices so intense they bordered on overwhelming. As they began to eat, Marie took small bites, just enough to be polite, but her mind was elsewhere. She observed Sandra closely, noting the subtle satisfaction in her eyes as Marie took each bite. Marie knew that Sandra believed she still had the upper hand, that her secret was safe. The time had come to shatter that illusion. Setting down her fork, Marie cleared her throat. "David, Sandra, there's something I'd like to talk about with both of you. It's important." David looked at her with concern, sensing the gravity in her tone. "Of course, Mom. Is everything okay?" Marie's gaze settled on Sandra, who maintained her calm exterior, but whose eyes flickered with a trace of unease. "I need to talk to you about these family dinners and the way I've been feeling afterward." Sandra's face remained composed, though Marie could see the hint of tension beneath her polite smile. "Oh, Marie, you've been having those digestive issues again. I've been so worried about you." Marie forced herself to remain calm, her voice steady. "Yes, Sandra, I've noticed. And I've also noticed that my symptoms only seem to appear after meals here, meals that you've prepared." David's brow furrowed. "Mom, what are you saying?" Taking a deep breath, Marie opened her purse and pulled out the notebook, the USB drive, and the printed lab results from Dr. Thompson. She laid them out on the table, her movements slow and deliberate, as she watched Sandra's face pale slightly. "I started documenting my symptoms, David, after I realized they only happened here. I took samples of the food and had them tested, and then I went to Dr. Thompson, who confirmed that I've been exposed to unusually high levels of irritants and compounds found in certain spices. All of the aligns with the food Sandra has been serving me." David looked from the evidence on the table to his mother, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. "Mom, are you saying you think Sandra has been making you sick?" Sandra's face twisted in feigned offense. "Marie, how could you accuse me of something so horrible? After everything I've done for you. I've been nothing but a caring daughter-in-law, and now you're accusing me of poisoning you." Marie's gaze never wavered. "I'm not accusing you, Sandra. I have proof. I recorded conversations where you hinted at wanting me out of your life, at being creative, in dealing with certain people who wouldn't step back." Sandra's composure began to crack, her eyes narrowing as she realized the gravity of the situation. "Those recordings mean nothing. You're twisting my words." David, still reeling from the shock, turned to his wife. "Sandra, is any of this true? I need you to be honest with me." Sandra's face softened, and she shifted her demeanor, attempting to look vulnerable. "David, honey, she's twisting everything. Marie has never accepted me as part of this family, and now she's trying to turn you against me with these lies." Marie remained calm, her voice unwavering. "I welcomed you into this family, Sandra. I defended you to friends and family who doubted your intentions, but you made it very clear how you felt about me when you began doing this." Sandra's face contorted with anger. "This is ridiculous. You're just trying to drive a wedge between David and me because you can't stand the fact that he's married to me instead of some." "Enough." David's voice cut through the room, filled with a pain and anger Marie had never heard before. He turned to Sandra, his eyes filled with disbelief and hurt. "I need to know the truth. Did you try to hurt my mother?" Sandra's mask slipped entirely, and she let out a bitter laugh. "Fine. You want the truth, David. Yes, I wanted her out of our lives. She's always meddling, always judging me, making me feel like I'll never be good enough for you or this family. I was tired of it. I thought, if she got sick enough, she'd finally leave us alone." David staggered back, his face pale. The reality of her confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Marie watched her son's heart break with an ache in her own chest, wishing she could shield him from this pain. But she knew that he needed to hear the truth, no matter how devastating. "I can't believe this," David whispered, looking at Sandra as if seeing her for the first time. You tried to hurt my mother. Do you even realize what you've done?" Sandra's face crumbled as she realized the depth of her mistake. "David, please, I only did it because I love you. I thought if she was out of the picture, we could finally have peace." David shook his head, backing away from her. "Love, this isn't love, Sandra. I don't even know what this is." Tears filled his eyes as he looked at his mother, guilt and sorrow etched deeply into his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." Marie reached out, pulling him into an embrace. "It's not your fault, baby. You couldn't have known." Sandra, now desperate, tried to approach him, but he held up his hand, stopping her in her tracks. "I need you to leave, Sandra. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." Sandra's face twisted in rage as she realized she had lost. Without another word, she turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. David sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Marie sat beside him, resting a comforting hand on his shoulder as he processed the betrayal. "I'm here, David," she whispered. "We'll get through this together." For a long time they sat in silence, the weight of the night settling over them. But despite the heartbreak, Marie felt a sense of peace. The truth was finally out, and she had protected her family from a darkness that had threatened to tear them apart. In time, she knew they would heal. But for now, all that mattered was that they were together, stronger than ever before. Picking up the pieces. In the weeks following Sandra's departure, Marie's life felt like a fragile shell, one that could crack under the slightest pressure. She had imagined a kind of relief when the truth came to light, but the reality was more complex. The revelation of Sandra's intentions had left deep wounds, not only in her family, but within her own heart. Every day, she found herself grappling with mixed emotions: grief, anger, and guilt. David had taken a leave of absence from work, spending most of his time at home with his children, Elijah and Chloe. He had asked Sandra to stay away, not just from him, but from their children as well, until he could sort through his feelings and decide on a course of action. Marie knew how much it hurt him to keep the children from their mother, but he couldn't allow them to be near someone he no longer trusted. Marie had taken it upon herself to be there for her son and grandchildren as much as possible. She began coming over daily, helping with meals, school drop-offs, and the little details of daily life that had become overwhelming for David. She was grateful to be there for him, yet every moment spent in his house reminded her of Sandra's betrayal, the lengths she had gone to push Marie out of their lives. One afternoon, Marie found David sitting alone in the living room, staring at an old family photo. It was from a holiday gathering a few years ago, long before Sandra's true colors had been revealed. In the picture, they were all smiling: David, Sandra, the children, and Marie, blissfully unaware of the darkness brewing beneath the surface. "Mom," David said quietly, not looking up as she entered. How could I not see it? How did I let this happen?" Marie's heart ached at the pain in his voice. She sat down beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "David, you loved her. You trusted her. You couldn't have known. Love can make us blind to the flaws in others." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "But you knew. You saw something I couldn't. I should have listened to you." She shook her head. "No, honey. I didn't know at first either. I just had a feeling, a suspicion that grew over time. And even then, it took a lot for me to confront it. This isn't your fault." David fell silent, his gaze still fixed on the photo. "The kids keep asking about her. I don't know what to tell them." Marie's heart sank. Elijah and Chloe were so young, too young to understand the complexities of what had happened. To them, Sandra was simply their mother, the woman who kissed their scrapes and tucked them into bed at night. How could they understand that the person they loved had hurt their grandmother, someone else they loved deeply? "Tell them the truth in a way they can understand," Mary said gently. "You don't need to tell them everything, but they deserve honesty. Let them know that Mommy isn't here right now because she did something that hurt someone, and that you both need time to work through it." David nodded slowly, digesting her words. I don't want them to hate her. She's still their mother." Marie squeezed his shoulder. "They won't hate her, David. They'll love her, because she's their mother. But as they grow older, they'll come to understand. Children are resilient. They'll find a way to reconcile their love for her with the truth." Over the next few days, David began the difficult process of talking to his children. Marie stayed nearby, ready to support him and the kids if needed. She could hear their quiet voices drifting from the living room as David explained in simple terms why Sandra was gone. Elijah, who was old enough to understand that something was wrong, asked questions, his young face creased in confusion. Chloe, still too young to grasp the full reality, simply nodded, accepting her father's words. Marie's heart broke for them. She wished she could shield them from the pain of loss, but she knew that this was part of life, a hard, painful part, but one that would make them stronger in the end. One night, as she was tucking Elijah into bed, he looked up at her with wide, sullen eyes. "Grandma, is Mommy ever coming back? he whispered, clutching his blanket. Marie's throat tightened. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes people make mistakes, and it takes time for them to make things right again. Elijah seemed to consider this, his face thoughtful. I hope Mummy fixes her mistake. I miss her. Marie kissed his forehead, holding back her own tears. I know you do, honey. I know. As she left his room, Marie felt a surge of anger towards Sandra. It wasn't enough that she had hurt Marie. She had hurt her son, her grandchildren, and shattered the family's sense of security. But Marie forced herself to let go of the anger, knowing that it would only fester and cause more harm if she held on to it. She had to be strong for her family now. Several weeks passed, and Marie began to notice subtle changes in David. He was quieter, more introspective, and though he was trying his best for his children, Marie could see the toll that Sandra's betrayal had taken on him. She knew that he was struggling with the decision of whether to pursue a divorce or attempt reconciliation for the sake of the children. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, David sat down with Marie at the kitchen table. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his face lined with worry. Mom, I don't know what to do, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. A part of me wants to forgive her, for the kids' sake, but I don't know if I can ever trust her again. Marie reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. David, forgiveness is a personal choice. It's not something anyone can force on you. But trust has to be earned. And sometimes, even if you forgive someone, it doesn't mean you can be with them. He looked down, his shoulders slumping. I keep thinking about what it would mean for the kids. Growing up without their mother, I don't want to put them through that. Marie's heart ached for him. She could see the love and pain warring within him, the deep sense of responsibility he felt for his children's happiness. David, you're a wonderful father, she said softly. And whatever decision you make, I know it will be the right one, because you're putting the children first. But remember that they need you to be happy and whole too. Staying with someone who's broken your trust, just for the sake of appearances, may not be the best thing for them, or for you. David nodded, though he looked no less burdened. I wish things had turned out differently. Marie sighed, squeezing his hand. So do I. But sometimes, life doesn't give us the ending we hoped for. We just have to make the best of what we have. They sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Marie thought of her own marriage, of the love she'd shared with her late husband, a love built on trust and respect. She wished the same for David, but she knew that he had to find his own path, even if it led him down a difficult road. As time went on, David slowly came to a decision. He filed for divorce, a choice that weighed heavily on him, but one he felt was necessary to protect himself and his children. Marie supported him every step of the way, helping him navigate the legal process and providing a stable, loving presence for Elijah and Chloe. The divorce was finalized quietly, without a messy court battle. Sandra moved out of the state, agreeing to supervised visits with the children at a later date. Though Marie had no sympathy left for Sandra, she felt a sense of relief that things hadn't devolved into a bitter fight. David began the slow process of healing. He returned to work, refocused on his children, and gradually rebuilt his life. Marie was proud of him, proud of his resilience and strength. Though the scars of Sandra's betrayal would never fully fade, they had both learned to move forward, carrying the lessons with them, but not letting them define their future. Marie also found peace, though it had been a hard-won journey. She resumed her routines, reconnected with friends, and cherished every moment she spent with her grandchildren. She had faced down her worst fears and emerged stronger. And though the road had been painful, she knew she had done what was necessary to protect her family. And through it all, she held on to one simple truth: love, even in its most imperfect forms, could endure. Her love for David and her grandchildren had carried her through the darkest moments, and she knew it would continue to guide her as they built a new future together.